Your dog hasn't chewed anything, hasn't barked, hasn't followed you into rooms uninvited. By every visible measure, everything is fine. That's the problem. There's a version of distress in dogs that produces no noise, no destruction, no obvious signal. It looks from the outside almost exactly like calm. And because we're conditioned to respond to what's loud and disruptive, this version goes undetected, sometimes for months, sometimes longer. What's actually happening inside a dog that has learned, through repeated experience, that its signals don't reach you, that is what this video is about. And the answer is more precise and more serious than most owners have been told. The operating assumption for most dog owners is this: dogs are resilient, they bounce back. If your dog isn't reacting, it's adjusting. Many people also believe, and this is where behavioral advice has done real damage, that ignoring a dog occasionally teaches independence. That a dog left to its own devices will learn to self-regulate, to become less demanding, more confident. What this belief misses entirely is the distinction between behavioral silence and emotional neutrality. They are not the same state. A dog that has stopped signaling is not a dog that has stopped feeling. Those are two completely different things, and treating them as identical is where the invisible wound begins. What actually happens when dogs are ignored repeatedly isn't adaptation. It's a documented psychological process called learned helplessness, a concept first identified by psychologist Martin Seligman and later applied extensively to animal behavior research. The mechanism is straightforward. When an organism repeatedly discovers that its responses produce no change in outcome, it stops responding. Not because it no longer wants a different outcome, because it has learned at a neurological level that trying doesn't work. Applied to your dog, this means the dog hasn't adjusted to less attention. It has stopped registering you as a reliable social anchor. That distinction between calm adaptation and social withdrawal as a survival response is the core of everything that follows. This isn't a gradual drift that takes months to materialize. Research from the University of Veterinary Medicine, Vienna, demonstrates that dogs actively track owner responsiveness and begin adjusting their attachment behavior within days of repeated non-response. The behavioral sequence is measurable. In the first few days, dogs typically increase their signaling attempts, more nudges, more proximity seeking, more sustained eye contact. By the end of the first week, those attempts plateau. Beyond that threshold, the pattern inverts: reduced eye contact, lower solicitation frequency, early signs of social avoidance. This is not a dog settling in. This is attachment erosion following a documented, predictable arc. There's a moment in this process that owners almost universally misread. The moment a dog stops trying. The dog that used to paw at your arm, press against your leg, rest its chin on your knee and wait, and now doesn't, may not have matured into independence. It may have reached the behavioral inflection point where solicitation attempts have been extinguished entirely. Ethological research on social mammals shows that proximity-seeking behavior diminishes sharply after repeated non-reinforced attempts, mirroring avoidant attachment patterns documented across species. What looks like a dog that has calmed down may actually be a dog that has quietly given up. That realization is worth sitting with. Here's the comparison that matters. A secure, well-attached dog resting independently looks like this: relaxed muscle tone, soft eye, easy breathing, capable of re-engaging readily when you move or speak. It chooses rest from a place of felt safety. A dog withdrawing from disconnection looks similar on the surface, but the diagnostic markers diverge. Watch the ears, slightly back, not fully neutral. Watch the tail, low, not wagging in anticipation. Watch the response latency. When you call, there's a hesitation that wasn't there before. A half-second delay that reflects a nervous system recalibrating its expectation of whether response is worth the effort. The behavioral output looks like calm. The internal state is something closer to defeat. What's driving this process mechanically is operant conditioning applied in reverse. Every ignored signal is, in behavioral terms, an extinction trial. Thorndike's law of effect, the foundational principle that behaviors producing no outcome are gradually eliminated, runs in the background of every interaction your dog has with you. When connection seeking consistently produces nothing, the dog's brain stops generating the neural pathways associated with that behavior. Neuroplasticity research in canines confirms this. The brain restructures around what works. When social initiation stops working, the motivational architecture supporting it begins to collapse, not dramatically, but systematically, over time. Most owners think ignoring their dog is a neutral act, an absence of input, a zero. Behavioral science says it isn't. In a species with a 15,000-year coevolutionary history of human responsiveness, the absence of social response isn't processed as neutral information, it's processed as rejection data. Studies measuring oxytocin response in dogs during owner interaction and its suppression during repeated social exclusion show that the neurochemical profile of an ignored dog is not the same as that of a resting dog. Zero attention is not zero impact. It is, in the dog's social processing system, an active signal this bond is unreliable. Dogs don't experience neglect in the abstract. They experience it in direct relation to the one person whose responsiveness matters most. Research tracking cortisol levels in dogs with chronically unresponsive owners found measurable stress hormone elevation, not in response to environmental threat, but in response to owner unavailability alone. The owner's behavioral patterns don't just affect the dog's mood in the moment, they become the dog's internal emotional baseline. A persistently distracted or unavailable owner doesn't simply create a less happy dog. They recalibrate the dog's entire stress regulation architecture around chronic low-level social insecurity. Two pieces of advice need to be addressed directly because they've caused measurable harm. First, ignore your dog to reduce clinginess. The logic seems intuitive. Withdraw attention, reduce the behavior. What it actually does is extinguish attachment-seeking behavior while leaving the underlying insecurity completely intact. The dog appears less clingy. The anxiety driving the clinginess increases. Second, dogs need to know you're the leader, not their entertainer. This comes from dominance theory, a framework largely discredited since the 1990s, when Dr. David Meck publicly revised his own earlier wolf research and clarified that dominance-based behavior in canids is far more contextual and relational than the rigid hierarchy model suggested. Ignoring a dog to assert authority doesn't build confidence. It builds disconnection. The source of the advice has been revised. The advice itself hasn't caught up. The deepest consequence of chronic inattention isn't the withdrawal behavior itself. It's what the withdrawal does to the dog's capacity to use you as a secure base at all. Dogs engage in a process called social referencing. They look to their owner when encountering unfamiliar stimuli to calibrate their own emotional response. Research from Monash University found that dogs with weakened attachment security show significantly higher ambient anxiety, lower exploratory behavior, and elevated fear responses in novel situations, even when the owner is physically present. The damage doesn't stay relational. A dog that has lost its owner as a reliable anchor begins processing the entire environment with a higher threat baseline. The world becomes less navigable, and the owner's presence stops being the thing that makes it safe. This process has a biological cost that's independent of behavior. Chronic social stress elevates baseline cortisol, suppresses oxytocin release, and dysregulates the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system governing stress response across all mammals. Veterinary behavioral studies have linked chronic owner inattentiveness to increased inflammatory markers in dogs. The concept of allostatic load, the cumulative physiological wear produced by sustained stress, applies here directly. Over time, the body absorbs what the social environment fails to resolve. Immune function, digestive regulation, and research suggesting correlations with shortened lifespan are all downstream of a stress system that never fully returns to baseline. The dog's body keeps score even when the behavior stops showing it. Reversing this doesn't require restructuring your schedule. It requires a different quality of presence, what behavioral researchers call responsive attunement. 3 specific changes produce measurable results. First, signal recognition. Learn to identify the subtle solicitation behaviors that most owners miss. The dog that positions itself in your sightline, the slow blink, the single quiet exhale near your feet. These are bids for connection. They're easy to overlook precisely because they're not demanding. Second, consistent micro-responses, brief but reliable acknowledgement. A glance, a hand resting momentarily on the dog's back is enough to retrain the dog's expectation of social reliability. It isn't about duration, it's about predictability. Third, structured interaction windows, short, consistent periods of focused engagement that give the dog an internal model of when connection comes. That predictability rebuilds a secure base faster than irregular, longer interactions. Behavioral reconditioning research documents measurable improvement in secure base behavior within 2 to 3 weeks of consistent responsive interaction. Here is the thing this entire video has been building toward. This was never a question of how much you love your dog. Most owners reading these signs love their dogs deeply. The problem is that dogs don't experience intent, they experience pattern. An owner who loves their dog but is chronically unavailable, absorbed in work, in screens, in the rhythm of a busy life, produces the same neurological outcome in that dog as an owner who simply doesn't engage. The nervous system doesn't register the love you feel. It registers the data it receives, the gap between how much you feel and how much your dog's nervous system actually receives. That's where the slow hurt lives. Think back over the last 7 days. When did your dog try to get your attention, and what did you do? If your dog has gotten quieter lately, less likely to seek you out, slower to respond when you call, share this with someone who might be missing those signs without realizing it. And if you want to go further, the next video covers the specific stress signals dogs display that almost every owner misreads as relaxation. The difference is smaller than you'd expect, and more important than most people know.